Good afternoon to you. Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here. Time for the Hurricane Outlook and discussion. It's Monday, October 3rd, 2022, and we have a lot to talk about today, but the good news is, as Florida recovers from Ian, and what a terrible situation that is down in the southwest part of the state, as well as across the peninsula with all of the flooding from the rainfall, we're going to get a break. It looks like the tropics are going to basically throw us a bone and keep things kind of calm for the next several days or so. But there is still plenty to talk about, so let's get on with it. First of all, National Hurricane Center homepage, the 2 p.m. tropical weather outlook, 91L here. Chances are now being reduced for development over the long term, 5 days or so. And then our system out here, this is 92L. I do think this goes on to develop, and if we look at the 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook map, boy, that's a mouthful, isn't it? This should develop out here and stay away from land areas, pile up a few ace points, get us pretty much to where we should be. We were almost there. We were at 99% of our ACE score for the year, the accumulated cyclone energy score. This was orange recently. Now it's yellow. Doesn't look like much is going to happen from this, but we do need to watch this area through here in the next week to 10 days or so. That is typically where we would monitor this time of year. Climatologically, that's the area we would watch. So whether or not there's something in the global models, that is the area that we would be focusing on this time of year anyway. Kind of unusual to have activity all the way out in the far eastern Atlantic, but it has been an unusual season, as we all know, and it's not over yet. I'll show you another set of different graphics I've got to kind of drive that point home that it's not over yet, but at the same time tempering that with we're almost there in terms of major impacts for the lower 48. We're almost out of the woods, but not quite yet. We'll get to that. So first, satellite animation this afternoon. This would be the remnants of Orlean that went into Mexico several hours ago, spreading some high-level moisture across over into Texas there. And then elsewhere, this right here, some of this is the energy left over from Ian. Believe it or not, Ian came up into the Carolinas, milled around up here. Now some of that vorticity or energy, the DNA of it, whatever you want to call it, there's some of that there. It is a non-tropical, extratropical, mid-latitude, whatever you want to call it. It's just about the structure. Again, these are just classifications that we give these systems, but it's not really fully the leftovers of Ian. It's just got some of that in there, some of that energy interacting with different temperature gradients in the atmosphere, and you get this sort of hybrid coastal storm. And that's the bottom line, impacts. And this is definitely having some impacts. I'm going to show you that as we progress here over the coming minutes. So sliding the satellite animation to the east a little bit. Here's 91L. Again, chances are diminishing for that to develop. This is 92L out here. This should go on to develop. And it could mill around out over the Atlantic for quite a while. I'll show you that on the GFS animation in just a moment, or the frame-by-frame analysis. Gulf and Caribbean, though, generally nice and clear now. No areas seen to be worried about through there, and we can see that on the vorticity signature as well. Nice and quiet throughout the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. There's what little vorticity there is for 91L, which is interesting. That is exactly where Ian got started, but the pattern is different this time. We're not going to have just one after the other going through, which is obviously a good thing. But there is the energy for 91L there. This is 92L out here. And then look at this right up here. I definitely want to draw your attention to that mid-Atlantic storm, that coastal storm, coastal low. It's not very strong, but you do have some pretty strong high pressure up here at the surface to the north, just kind of generalizing here. And this is low pressure here to the south. And in between the two, you have what's called a pressure gradient. The difference in pressure over distance, and it's kind of squeezing it in there, the air, and it's funneling it all towards the coast over here, especially on the backside of the storm system. You get some strong easterly winds on the north side, northerly winds on the west side, and that's piling up the water along the North Carolina Outer Banks, parts of the Chesapeake Bay, and even into the western Atlantic, into New Jersey, and parts of Maryland and Delaware as well. A fairly high impact event from a coastal flooding perspective for those folks up there. And I can show you that over on the National Weather Service homepage. Let's just refresh this to make sure of the latest data. And let's just click around a little bit. This is New Jersey, the Mid-Atlantic states, and even parts of Long Island. Flood advisories, coastal flood warnings, they're all in effect. Plus there's the rainfall. You can see that over here on the radar thumbnail. There's definitely some heavy rain with the system. It's just been raining and raining and raining. Maybe going to get some minor river flooding from this, so got to take that into consideration. Scooting south just a little bit into the Carolinas just to show you what's happening here. Coastal flood warnings for the Outer Banks, gale warnings in that sort of purplish color, and then your flood advisories for inland areas on the sounds of North Carolina. And we can see this very well outlined from the National Weather Service. Coastal impacts, it's kind of like a PDF that they put online. And all you got to do to find this stuff is go to weather.gov, put in the zip code of the area you're interested in, and then just look for headlines. Anything in red, anything that says, headline making storm, or just something that looks like it would be important, click on it, and oftentimes you'll find this little gem right here where the local WFO will put together a nice set of graphics for you, really explaining things in very easy to understand terms, and you can share these and learn from them and know exactly what to expect. So just keep that in mind. I mean, the Weather Service does put these products out, and they are very helpful. So that coastal storm, let's redo the map here real quick, is providing some action, like I said, to the Mid-Atlantic states, even from Long Island Sound all the way down to the Carolinas. Let's take a look real quick. We have a permanent camera up here on the Long Island Sound in Bating Hollow, New York. Kind of blustery there. You can see the beach just a little bit. Pretty big waves out there on what is normally a very placid Long Island Sound. If we zoom in down here, we have 4 cameras along the Outer Banks here at one spot. 3 of the 4 are working right now. One of them, it's got a problem with its cable. I got to go up there and fix that. But this is the Pier cam at Rodanthe Pier. This is looking to the south, I guess you would say. Like if you were on the pier and you turned your head to the right, this is Rodanthe down here. And yes, the water is coming up under some of those houses. And I can show you proof of that right here. No, we don't want to switch audio. Thank you. This is some video that was sent to me just a little while ago by one of our really good friends out there. This is Rodanthe. Look, I know it's no surprise. Maybe people shouldn't build so close to the beach. That's not for us to argue today. These are the impacts. That's the bottom line. That's what's happening. This is literally just a few minutes ago. And this is from a storm, again, that has some of the leftover energy from Ian. Believe it or not, they're a pretty big event for the Mid-Atlantic. These next couple of high tides, the one happening, and it's just getting over with now, and then the high tide tomorrow afternoon from the Carolinas north could be rather problematic. So these are some examples of that. And then finally a shot from one of the houses out there of one of our partners, not overwashing the dunes right here, but it's farther down this street that we're having the issues there. I think that's Shoreline or Atlantic, can't remember exactly. But anyway, those are the impacts from that coastal storm. Didn't want to ignore it. Now, let's move on to some analysis for going forward. All right, we know where we are. What about the future? Well, water temperatures are still very favorable for the hurricane season to be active through November, when it should hopefully come to an end November 30th. We have the La Nina out here in the Pacific, and it is absolutely solid right now. Some of these anomalies in the eastern Pacific there are off the scale. I talked about this the other day. They are literally off the scale. Those purples, 5 degrees Celsius, unbelievable. That is really incredible. Near the Galapagos, those turtles and iguanas down there, probably not liking it too much. It is, it's true. Those water temperatures, the Galapagos Islands are down here, and these temperatures are running several degrees colder than they should be. Meanwhile, the Atlantic Basin, as you can clearly see, tremendous area of anomalous warmth in the far North Atlantic, and then we have the fairly, it's still pretty substantial, but nothing compared to the North Atlantic, as you can see. But even in the deep tropics there, the main development region, water temperatures running above average all the way through in the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico. And I believe I set up a graphic where we can zoom in. Yes, I did. So yeah, the Caribbean still above normal. We have reduced the temperatures right up against the coast. And that is important. Yes, we can still have hurricanes moving out of the Caribbean and into Florida, into the Gulf Coast itself west of Florida, into the southeast coast? Yes, of course we can, even into November. But the impacts from them would be reduced, not eliminated, so we at least don't have to worry as much, hopefully, about intense hurricanes making landfall at peak intensity like we just saw with Ian. But there's a balance here. I don't want to get too, where we feel like we're safe and everything's all clear, because you can still get a fast-moving hurricane to come up and deliver a big surge and a lot of heavy rain if one of them were to stall out somewhere. Of course, they'd have to be moving slower to do that. It's just we're almost there. We're almost to the point where really impactful hurricanes are going to be harder to come by for the lower 48. But that says nothing of our friends down in the Caribbean. They can still be impacted severely, as we have seen with 2020, a prime example, Eta and Iota. And there's others. Hurricane Michelle back in 2001 was very impactful for, I believe it was this area right through here, if memory serves. Category 4 coming up out of the Western Caribbean. And then certainly, just to remind you, yes, in 2005, Wilma got its start down in the Caribbean, came up and clipped this area, and then went on to make landfall up here, something like that, at the end of October. Now, like I said, we're getting closer, and looking at the actual sea surface temperatures, these are different, what we call isotherms, or lines of equal temperature, and we can just kind of look around and see, where are the water temperatures still warm enough to where you could get a really intense hurricane all the way to landfall if the atmosphere allowed. Well, generally speaking, it's the Mississippi-Alabama line over to just about Mexico Beach. And I know everybody up there is like, great. But that's right now. If a week from now that could change. We're slowly eroding away the warmer water temperatures from the shelf waters south. And that's the way it naturally progresses. We warm from the south to the north, generally during the spring months, and then it accelerates really fast, those water temperatures, because these waters here are shallower. And so they're easier to warm up, and they are much more efficient at cooling off. So we're at that point now where we're just about there, at least from an intense hurricane perspective. Very, very, very rare to get anything in South Texas. Not impossible, but it's rare. And yes, a good deal of the rest of Texas is still very warm water temperature-wise, but it's hard because usually, to get something to come east to west into Texas, you have to have solid ridging all across the southeast, and the mechanics of it just usually aren't there. But we're getting there. I just want to, a little bit of good news here. We're almost out of the woods overall. Now, the Mid-Atlantic definitely have cooled off here. The gradient is starting to get a little bit more pronounced. In this case, that difference of temperature over distance. You have pressure gradients, and you can have temperature gradients. And here, the water temperatures, the 26 Celsius line has pulled offshore of the Carolinas and Georgia. So if you went down to the beach at Wrightsville or off of Folly Beach or whatever, Tybee Island, water temperatures are going to be in the mid to upper 70s, whereas a week to 10 days ago, they were in the low 80s. So we're getting there. You could still get a hurricane to come up and cause some problems, though. Yes. And it would have to be pretty fast moving, and that has happened before. And of course we had Sandy, 2012, 10 years ago, a sort of different type of system that got involved with the jet stream, and it became what people called a superstorm. It's just we're not out of the woods entirely, but I am trying to give you a little bit of good news here in light of everything that's been happening post-Ian down in Florida. All right, real quick, looking at the GFS from the 12Z run today. 850 millibars in the atmosphere, cyclonic vorticity. Again, 12Z, that's Zulu time, 8 a.m. Eastern time. That's what that means. UTC, Universal Time Coordinate, whatever. 8 a.m. Eastern time, that's where I live, in the Eastern time zone. So I always look at it, okay, it was initialized at 8 a.m. during daylight saving time. And once we flip back to standard time, it'll be 7 a.m. But whatever. The bottom line, what does it show? First of all, the initial map or starting point, there is our coastal storm. Here's 92L, and here's what's left of 91L. And let's just move this out into time, shall we? Using the arrow keys on my keyboard, I'll do just that. So you see those three features. Nothing really jumps out as too organized, but eventually 92L tries to develop some out over the central Atlantic there. This is past 5 days. So the journey over to here, yes, it might develop, might be a weak, short-lived tropical storm. We will just have to wait and see about that. Let me switch over real quick to the euro, because it is time enough that enough of the frames have come in. We'll use the EC Fast that Dr. Cowan has set up for us. Yeah, we only got out to, I figured to have more. Let's see, EC Fast, wrong one. We need to go to the 12Z. There we go. My fault. That's fine. So here we go. We got enough frames. Just comparing the euro again. Same kind of thing. We go out to 6 days, finally 7 days. Not much activity out there. There's 92L that ends up over here. We'll watch that and see what happens with it. Really hard to get Eastern Atlantic systems to come all the way across. Do start to see a little bit of a lowering of pressures and a piling up of the air. All of that yellow down there, that's the vorticity. Just energy starting to coalesce at about a week's time. And that's the area that I was telling you. We have to watch the Western Caribbean regardless of what we have on the maps currently. And we'll do just that. Hurricane season is not over just yet. MJO, Madden-Julian Oscillation. A couple people asked me about this. It's not favorable right now in the Atlantic Basin. How do we know? Well, the phase diagram chart shows us. This is where the Madden-Julian Oscillation is most prevalent. Right now, it's basically nowhere. It's in the null phase. Expected to amplify over in the maritime continent region. That's way over there near New Zealand. I think parts of the Philippines. I got to look that definition up, and I can just cheat and say it's going to go on over to the West Pacific, which of course is the Philippines, the deep tropics around there, Indonesia, just generally the West Pacific. I don't know everything about geography, but that's where it's headed. And the bottom line, it's not in the Atlantic Basin, all right, and the Western Hemisphere. It's going to be over there towards the West Pacific as a whole over the next week to 10 days or so. And I can show you that too. It's pretty well corroborated with the JMA, the Japanese Meteorological Agency. This is the ECMWF. Should have pointed that out, but there you go. They're both in pretty good agreement. When you see it come out and swing around into phases 8 and 1 and 2, this is where you start to get activity more focused in the Atlantic Basin. We don't see that coming up anytime soon. So there is even more good news as we wrap things up. All right. So just a couple of items of note. I will be working on compiling data from our field mission into Ian, and we're still working on it. We've got to go collect equipment soon. We have pulled data down from some of the weather stations. We're analyzing it, checking it out. Some discrepancies with the wind data. We're trying to figure out where there's an error. We have the wind data. We're just not sure if it's the right standard, so to speak. And we got to make darn sure, because some of it, if it is correct, is pretty darn high. It could be some of the highest wind readings we ever recorded, and that will be over the midpoint bridge at Fort Myers. But we have to check it out and analyze it and make sure it's right before we publish it or send it out into the wild, so to speak. So stay tuned for that. Been looking through some of the different video that our Nest system captured. Those cameras are remarkable in that even when they go offline from a network outage or whatever, if the network comes back up, we do use Verizon. If it comes back up, then the Nest Cam, as long as it's got power and it's connected to the hotspot that's in there, it'll stream again. So we get these little chunks of data, these little chunks of video data on our Nest app or in my Nest account, and I can see those, and that might only be a second. They might be 3 seconds. Some of them are a minute and a half or whatever, and we've gotten some, and a couple of them are very intriguing from a camera that we had up in sort of the North Fort Myers area along the river up there. I'll show you later. We'll get there. I'm just kind of setting this up. And then some data that came in from Captiva. We had a camera out there. It's still there, presumably, the morning after, and that was pretty remarkable as well. So pouring through all the stuff to see what we got, and then eventually I'll head back down to Florida maybe next week and start recovering the equipment, meet with a few people, get some on-the-ground observations from folks, and start piecing all this together and trying to make sense of it, and so forth and so on. All right? All right. As always, thanks for tuning in. I do appreciate your time and attention. As always, I hope you learned something. That's what I'm here for, and I do appreciate that you're on your end of the screen paying attention to me. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack. I'll be back with more for you tomorrow morning.